My name is Paul Boyle. I'm the Vice-Chancellor or Rector at Swansea University in Wales in the UK. And I'm also the Vice President of the EUA. And very pleased to see that so many of you could come along to this session, which is a session on recognition and rewards of academic career profiles. We're going to be thinking a lot about the diversity of academic careers, their interconnections, and how indeed we reward those academics appropriately for the work that they do. We know that there's a lot of work in this area related particularly to researcher assessment, for example, and EUA has taken quite a strong stance to say that we think we need to, of course, consider research as a vital part or vital component of what academics do, but so too are other elements as well. And I'm sure we're going to hear from our colleagues today about some of the ways we might reflect on and think about the way that different academics are awarded. I'm not going to say any more other than to introduce our three speakers. And I'm really pleased to say we've got three fantastic speakers along with us today. First of all, we've got Noémie. Noémie is a postdoctoral researcher at Hasselt University and VUMC Amsterdam, where she conducts research on research. So she's somebody who's focused in her PhD studies and since then about how we do research and so on. So it'll be very interesting to hear from you in a moment, Noémie. Second up, we've got Anne, and she's been elected rector, or in our language in the UK, Chancellor or Vice-Chancellor of UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, elected in 2013 and re-elected for a second term in 2017. And Anne's research has focused particularly on climate and environment and sustainability in the Arctic and globally. And third up, we're going to hear from Marek. Marek's a UNESCO chair in institutional research and higher education policy, and also director of the Institute for Advanced Studies in Social Sciences and Humanities at the University of Poznan in Poland. And his research focuses particularly on quantitative studies of science and higher education research and policy. Three fantastic speakers who can give us not only different geographical perspectives on this topic, but also different insights to different elements of how we think about rewarding academic careers. I'm going to hand over first of all to Noémie, and she's going to begin. And I know that she has some slides to share. We'll move on to Anne and then to Marek. I'll then ask one or two questions before we open out to questions. And we'd really encourage the audience to put questions, if you can, into the questions and answers section. And we'll do our very best to try and answer as many of those as we can during the session. So with no further ado, first of all, Noémie, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for this nice introduction. And I also want to thank EUA, not just for inviting me, but for inviting an early career researcher into this session, because I think that means quite a lot, actually. So today I want to talk about research success and research assessments in science. And I will talk about some findings from my PhD project that I did in Hasselt University together with Professor Pinkston, where I looked at research success and research integrity and the link between the two. So in this presentation, I will quickly present three findings from my research, and I will talk about what I think needs to happen in the future of research rewards and recognition. So the first finding I wanted to discuss, it comes from a survey that I've done from within my research, in which I tried to understand what researchers think of indicators of academic success. So I had 18 different indicators of academic success, for example, publishing in high-impact journal. And for each indicator, I would ask, how important is that in advancing your career? How important is that in advancing science? And how important is that for your personal satisfaction? And what I found is that there are indicators that are more important for advancing science, but not so much for advancing careers. And these indicators tended to be related to openness, transparency, quality, and innovation. While there are some indicators that are really important in advancing careers, but not so much in advancing science, and these tend to be related to prestige, status, and competition. So that's the first finding. Second finding comes from another step of my PhD, which is I did focus groups and interviews with different stakeholders from the Flemish biomedical research science. And I asked every interviewee or participant, what is research success? And then I asked them what threatens research integrity. And what I found is that quite simply, current research assessments are thought to threaten research integrity. So the way we define success at the moment is thought to threaten research integrity. That's for three reasons. First, because we overvalue outputs. So we ignore how the research is done. We ignore the research processes. Second, because we expect exceptional outputs. So we discourage researchers from being realistic. And third, because we look at researchers individually, so we discourage them from being collaborative. Now, the third finding that I wanted to talk very briefly comes also from the focus groups and interviews, but this one is about careers. So in the setting where I did my PhD, for each student that comes into academia, there's very few of them that will be able to have a tenured position. So it's a ratio of 1 in 10, maximum 2 in 10. So that leads to a lot of very important problems. First, it creates a very strong competition between the young researchers, which is unhealthy. It also blocks diversity, so it's always the same profiles of people that can make it into academia, and there's not really a broad diversity in the profiles that can obtain a permanent position in academia. It also leads to a strong feeling of failure for those who have to leave but wanted to stay in academia. And finally, it blocks changes because the person who succeeds to stay in academia will be the one to teach the young students how to stay in academia and how to survive. So there's very little scope for change. So based on this, what needs to happen? So this is a bit more my personal views on the topic. So first, we need to change the indicators. I think this is quite obvious, and this is already pretty well captured by DORA or by the Leiden Manifesto, the metric tide. There's a lot of statements and there's a lot of changes happening in this regard. But we shouldn't stop there. We should also address the assessment and how we assess researchers so that we capture a broader range of activities. We capture more of what the researchers do and how the research is done. We should also try to look at team recognition, recognizing teams instead of just individuals. And we should also try to recognize negative results and replication so that we have a more realistic outview of science. And then on another level, in the level of careers of researchers, it's also important to have changes in there because otherwise changing assessments will be very difficult. So in this sense, I believe that it's important to diversify the profile that can succeed in academia, that it's also important to have good, better, at least, employment security, and also salary security, so that researchers who are employed by an institution do not have to constantly apply for competitive finding to be able to have a salary. And finally, because we cannot have all of a sudden 10 out of 10 PhD students having a tenured position, we need to have more support for young researchers who change careers and who have to move beyond academia, so either training or also just support within the institution. And finally, there's a level also beyond that, which is beyond the institution. So we also need to look at how institutions are funded themselves by the government. Is it performance-based funding? How is the funding calculated for the institution? And what is the outlook of the institution on the rankings, like international institutional ranking? So that's it for me. I leave the floor to other speakers.
Thank you very much indeed, Naomi, and a great start and great slides as well. Thank you very much indeed. Anne, I think we're going to move over to you next. And Naomi, thank you. You did keep to time, so that's great. Your 5 minutes are up now, Anne.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to give a presentation at the EUA conference. I've already been introduced. My name is Anne Husbæk, and I'm director of the UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, and head of board of Universities Norway. So the question is, how do we value and evaluate skills and knowledge in academia? And I think the previous presentation gave a lot of insight into this. Usually we know that it is metrics that counts, biometrics, bibliometrics, and we count publications. And I think that the DORA was pointing in another direction, and we could move into a new world of other ways to evaluate research. If in Norway, the universities Norway have newly had 2 reports that are, did I move my slide? I could move to the 3rd slide. Could anyone help me with that?
At the moment, Anne, I can see the 3rd slide.
You can? Oh, that's good.
The one with the categories on the left.
Yeah, that's fine. Then I just move on. In this table, the new assessment areas are described in the matrix called NORCAM. As you can see, there are 6 areas that could be evaluated both by description, documentation, and reflection. This matrix can, of course, also be used in career supervision and filled in to show the candidate's skills and where to advise for further development. The candidate may, in this system, not only list achievements, but reflect upon their importance in an holistic way. I try to move to the 3rd slide, the 4th slide, and I see it. That's good. I have been heading a committee on behalf of Universities Norway, looking at a new description of how positions in academia could be organized. We look for flexibility, attractiveness, and foreseeable structure. Previously, or at the moment actually, there are 3 ladders to a top position in academia today, and the group has proposed just 1 such ladder. If we start at the bottom, there are a number of positions in Norwegian universities that do not require a PhD, typically in structures of different kind. In order to head for a top-tier position, PhD is needed. There are, as Noemi said, far more PhD positions than tenure positions in academia, and many PhD candidates have to be guided out of academia to private or public sector. This is a wanted step by our government. The next level is a postdoc, tenure track, or university researcher position, all of which are non-permanent positions. In tenure track positions, the candidate is heading for a permanent position if certain predefined goals are hit. These positions are not much in use in Norway today, but are, in my opinion, a structured position for a motivated candidate. The ordinary position, postdoc position, will give the candidate most of all research abilities, but also basic teaching abilities in our proposed system. Level 3 represents a permanent position, but with a clear goal to get the competence needed for a top-tier position. Both at level 3, R3 and R4, we do include differences in time allocated for research, teaching, and other activities. In R4, we suggest professors with a wide variety of skills and knowledge, both with regard to teaching, research, business, public sector, etc. But the candidates need PhD and some teaching experience in the basic. This includes, for instance, professor of practice. For this system to function properly, there are 2 prerequisites: a precise description of competences needed for each level, and career supervision for employees at all levels beside R4. In summary, we need positions with precise descriptions of qualification and competence, which is reflected in a career assessment matrix, and we need career supervision for academic employees at all levels, with the exception of R4. The supervision is pointed to further career in academia and also to head out of academia for those who either do not want or not suitable for academic position. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Anne, for another clear presentation and for keeping to time as well. I enjoyed it very much. So third up, we have Marek. Over to you, Marek.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for this kind invitation. I will not have slides, which is a pity perhaps, but I want to reflect a bit on a decade of international comparative studies of the academic profession. I was studying the academic profession through large-scale surveys, hundreds of interviews, and now I'm studying academic profession based off bibliometric data. And I want to make a couple of remarks, maybe with a view of further discussion later on. So recognition and awards in academia and in science. I would say that recognition is in the very center of academic careers. Scientists work for money a bit, for recognition a bit. A priority of discovery, known from the old studies of science, is the key point. Priority of discovery and recognition of the priority. There's only one winner, one discoverer, and the rest is less important, which is obviously not true, but it's a very nice picture. The core of success in academic science is through recognition at various levels. There is individual recognition, recognition for research groups, recognition for departments, recognition for institutions. So there are various levels of recognition. But at the same time, there is steep hierarchy in academic science, and it is key for the development of science. So for the development of academic science. So we are talking about, say, 20,000 universities globally, and say 1,000 universities globally which are involved in global research. And the difference between the recognition and the awards is parallel to the difference between those types of institutions. We have institutions which are, I would say, fully focused on teaching, institutions which are powerfully focused on research, and we have hundreds or thousands of institutions somewhere in the middle. And the type of recognition we award and the type of rewards we provide to scientists, but also to research groups, depends on the type of institutions we are talking about. Let's say there's enormous difference between this 1,000 research-intensive institutions, globally known and globally shown in Shanghai ranking or Leiden ranking, and the remaining, say, 19,000 higher education institutions globally, which are mostly teaching focused. So I would say, coming to the basic question about recognition and rewards, I would say that recognition has to fit the person and has to fit the institution. So when you have teaching involved and teaching focused institutions, there is no big deal in actually rewarding research. It's important, but what should be rewarded? Good teaching. And this is the American case of liberal arts colleges, where research is relatively unimportant and teaching is enormously important. What type of teacher you are? Excellent. That's the point. And at the same time, if we speak about research-intensive universities, this is where research should be rewarded and where recognition comes through research. So I can see those divisions between institutional types. We need to know where we are located. We need to know what type of institution we are talking about. And if we focus on research-intensive institutions and on the research-involved staff, clearly recognition comes through research. And there is clear metrics, hierarchies are steep. We know who the winners are and who the losers are. We know it from peer review, we know it from grants received, we know it from all type of bibliometrics and other metrics, including certainly peer review. But when we move on to this mostly teaching institutions, recognition is different. And the key thing to have successful academic life is to fit the institution. If you are a research-intensive person, a scientist, you need to look for a research-intensive institution rather than feel bad or unrewarded or unrecognized in teaching-focused institution. And the other way around, if you're a fully teaching-focused person, a teacher, it's hard to be recognized in top global research-intensive universities. So I would say these are basic remarks which show that recognition depends on the institutional type, that people should be located, scientists should have mobility within institutions if they don't fit their institution, because the worst thing is to feel unrewarded or unrecognized in your workplace. And that would be more or less it for the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Marek. So maybe just to begin with, I can see that we've got some questions coming in, and I'll turn to those as soon as I can, because I want the audience to have the opportunity to engage with us. But just to start us off, one of the things that comes to my mind, and it does relate, of course, to the point you've just been making, Marek, that we have very different types of university, not just globally, but even within nations, where some are very much more teaching focused and some are much more research focused, and some presumably fall in between. And I guess there's an interesting question about whether you feel we can measure our teaching performance as accurately and as usefully as we might argue, debatably, that we can measure our research performance. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, why we are measuring research so nicely? Because it's somehow measurable. We have the data, we have data sets, we measure what we can, and we can measure a lot. And if we focus on teaching, we tried everywhere, especially in the UK. We try to do it, but it doesn't work. So measuring teaching is much more difficult. And ranking institutions by teaching level is even more difficult. Some countries do it. In most countries, it's still very difficult. And what is unfair is that in most systems, only research is measured because it's easily measurable, and we recognize all institutions in a system as if these institutions were research intensive. Well, they are not. The vast majority of institutions are not involved in global research and internationally respectable research, in globally indexed research, because they are not capable of doing it. We can see it especially in Central Eastern Europe, but I believe we can see it, well, everywhere. So fairness is the key to measuring and recognizing research. Just be fair.
Well, that's a good point to make. Anne, if I could turn to you, you demonstrated to us that in Norway you've got a new system that's being developed to try and take into account the variety of different contributions an academic might make. How much thought has gone into the relative weightings of those, and do you put more or less weight on different elements, and does that vary by institution, by discipline? How are you going about that?
Well, I think I presented quite new reports that has not been used till now in Norway. So, and I think also some institutions may even resist to what I presented to you, but I think it is a good idea. I think it is a good idea, but it needs to be evolved in a way that both the professors and all employees in the university feel safe and comfortable with the way things are done. I think it started with that we signed the DORA declaration, and we went into a new situation of evaluating research. At the same time, we have had a lot of merger between university college and universities in Norway. So even the research-intensive universities have got new employees and new students, and the reflection on education, teaching, and teaching quality has been much more in focus. So I think time has come now to go to the next step, which is what I presented. We don't know if we will be successful, but I think several countries have thought in the same way, and Naomi has also presented some of the same things in her very nice presentation. So I think there is no way back. We need to reward other skills in the future that we have done till now, and I think this, what I presented, is a step forward. The other thing I wanted to comment on was research and teaching intensive universities. I think that in universities, teaching should be research-based. And at least in Norway, we think about it that way. So the group of people should do research and teaching at the same time, but it used to be 50% of each in every tenure position. This is not going to be the case in the future. I think that we have some position with more teaching abilities and more with the research. So this is going to change. The third thing I want to comment is I think our sector is international. So even though the institutions are different, I think that people working in our institution, 25% from outside Norway, is in an international work market. So that makes it important to discuss what we are discussing today in order to make that happen, that you can move in between countries and your skills and knowledge will be appreciated in a new country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. And I certainly agree. And of course, we must remember that individual academics, even if they are capable of wonderful, excellent, globally important research, during their career may work in very different types of institutions to get them to a place where they are able to engage in one of the research-intensive universities. So there's lots of things they will have to think about as they develop their career paths. If I could just turn to you, Noémie, I thought your presentation was very interesting, and you took as a next step to think a little bit about research integrity and how research integrity may or may not be influenced by the way that we're assessing and taking into account people's careers. Maybe would you like to reflect just a little bit more on that, because that's quite an interesting dimension to this question.
Yes, sure. Just one point that I want to bring back from the comments that just happened, because there's one point that I find really interesting when you mentioned, Paul, that we might not be as good in measuring teaching than in measuring research. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that measuring teaching is very subjective. And more we are realizing that in measuring research, we should be more subjective. We should use measurements that are less quantitative, that are less focusing on the outputs. So maybe if we start to accept the need for this subjectivity, we might realize that we can find ways to measure teaching. So that's one point that I thought was interesting. Second one, in relation to research integrity, well, what I realized is, and it's nothing new, we know that most of the problems of research integrity are caused or are believed to be caused by pressures in the system. And these pressures are normally created by either competition, publication pressure, so you're being pushed to publish, and also wrong incentives. And all of these three elements are part of the recognition system. So one of the big problems in this is that the only thing that is being really recognized is the publication. So there are a lot more activities than publishing when you're a researcher, even just in the research pillar. So not counting science, not counting teaching, not counting services, but just in the research pillar. Publication is a very small proportion of that, but that's the only thing that we evaluate. So that deviates the behaviors of researchers so that they focus on things that are publishable. And in doing so, they have to learn to write science in a way that is impressive and publishable, and that will reach high impact factor journals, and that will be interesting for people. So this is the baseline of the tension between succeeding in science and being a good researcher, where you should be completely transparent, report everything, follow the best quality of the best practices of your work. But you cannot do that if you just want to publish in high impact factor journals.
Okay, thank you very much, Noémie. I'm going to turn now to some of the questions that are coming in from our audience. And just to remind our audience, there are various ways you can put questions forward, but preferably, if you're able to put the questions into the left-hand question, there's a little symbol with a question mark in it, and that allows us to look at questions, and then people can rank those questions by voting for them. And so people can vote for each of the questions, and then we then know which question most people would like us to ask, and we have, in a sense, a little ranking. So I'm going to look through that now, and one at the top of my list at the moment is from Thomas Jurgensen, and he's asking, if you divide the system into research and teaching universities, will you not limit access to research-based learning for a huge number of students? Who wants to come in on that? Marek or Anne or Noémie? Or I'll pick one of you if you... Marek.
Yes, I can say a few words. Yeah, we are talking about a relatively rich part of the world, which is Europe. And in Europe, certainly, these divisions are not as tough as globally. So in this rich, or generally in OECD countries, this combination of research and teaching is quite possible and still viable. But if we look globally, and those thousands and thousands of institutions, this link is very weak. And basically, this link remains in capital cities, in major academic cities, 1, perhaps 2 universities per country outside of the OECD area. So in the future, we can expect this link to be more and more difficult to be sustainable, because, well, this type of research we think globally is enormously expensive, and if it's not countable, as Noemi shows, doesn't come into publications, it's not publishable. The state is thinking, and the public is thinking, is it worth it? Why we do the research which is not publishable at all, and that is not visible globally at all? So this is my initial reflection from inside relatively rich part of the world, which is Europe.
Just a brief comment. So if we accept master students for PhD positions in rich countries, do we then have students coming from non-research based educational institutions, and how is that?
Yeah, that's a huge issue about the overall global mobility of talents and top minds. If they come, what is their background? Probably, if we follow this line of thinking, master level teaching and master level education would be focused in those good universities in the rich part of the world, which is very bad for everyone, for developing countries and for us here in this developed world. But this is one of the possible consequences.
Great. Well, let's move on to the next question. And what I'm not sure about is whether or not our audience wants to speak themselves. I didn't check that with Thomas, but Deirdre, your question is the next one up. You've got 7 votes. So Deirdre, did you want to ask your question, or shall I go ahead? I'm not sure whether Deirdre has... Oh, okay, you're telling me to go ahead. I see in the chat function. So Deirdre has asked, how would the conference theme of Universities Without Walls be reflected in academic career recognition and rewards? How would we recognize academics that are good at impact, particularly SDG impact? So Noemi, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I see it more as a general question on how we could recognize academic careers. Well, so it's also, the question basically is, how can we recognize academic careers in a system where we don't have necessarily a direct affiliation, an institution where we are going to, and this is our role as an academic. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, I feel that there are 2 parts. That's the first part. And then the second part is about how do you measure the impact of the work that people are doing, particularly how it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah. Well, so one thing that I always find very interesting is how do we measure impact? Right now, we use a lot of quantitative metrics. Then we moved, like Anna mentioned, to more holistic measures where you ask the researcher to describe how they have an impact on their work, on their environment, and on the society. So I think the key here is really if we want to be good at measuring impact, we have to talk to researchers. We have to ask researchers what is impact for them in their relation to their work. And I'm saying that because I work a lot with young researchers, early career scientists, and I realize that we all have our own definition of the impact that we want to have in our work, but we have to build ourselves a sort of artificial way of defining impact based on what our institution is evaluating. So I think we have to move more towards listening to what researchers in their setting see as impact, and like Marek mentioned, have something that is more personalized to the institution. So each institution could have the researchers explain why they are impactful in this setting, but really by something that is more bottom up instead of assessing top down. This is impact, show me that you have it.
That's interesting. Marek or Anne, did you want to reflect on that?
Well, I can just say that when you are either trying to hire a new professor or a person who wants to be promoted in your own institution, the easy way, as we all know, is to count publications and do things that are very, the numbers of one thing or another. It is much more difficult when it comes to your opinion on the impact that is described by the applicant or in a situation. So it's much more demanding to be in committees and to judge what's done by others. But I don't think there is no way around that. We have to learn how to do it, and we have to sort of standardize it. But it's standardized in a qualitative way, which is much more difficult. And if you want a fair judgment, many people said it's easier to count than to actually try to understand what a person has done from the bottom. The research process instead of number of publication, for instance, much more difficult. So I think it will take some time to have this implemented in the institutions that and the sooner the better, but I think it will be harder, and some people may feel that I don't get the right judgment. But I think it is a move forward, and we cannot avoid it. And I think it will make our sector better if this is implemented. The sooner the better.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Let's move on to the next question. And this question asks, I'd love to hear from the panel how they look at evaluating services to society, the third pillar next to research and teaching. Examples including science communications, serving as experts to the government during the COVID pandemic, and so on. Anne, I'm going to turn to you first, only because I think within your table, you did have that as one of the characteristics. How do you imagine evaluating that?
Well, it's not done yet, but I think we have to work out sort of. We have actually worked out a lot of indicators that could be put into that category. So I think we have to work on it, and I think we have to share experiences in doing that, because it's not done in one moment to put that into the matrix. So I think even innovation is not evaluated the way it should be if you have patents or you have made a business out of your research. It's not something that is evaluated when you are promoting, if you are applying for a new position. So this is something that we have to do together. We have to work on it together, and maybe the European University Association could take a lead in work like that, because I think many people wonder how it will sort of end up, and I'm more than willing to participate because I have made some thoughts about it.
There's an offer. You need to be careful. You may be taken up on that offer.
Thank you.
Marek, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that measuring service to the society, measuring this third pillar activities is enormously difficult. But I was so being fragile and being careful is important. But also measuring depends on the academic stage. So what you measure for full professors, tenured professors in good universities must be different from what you measure from young postdocs or doctoral students. What I'm aiming at is saying that what matters for professors, like impact on the society, maybe university business links, maybe advising to the government, etc., may not measure to young academics and postdocs at all. So I have this feeling that in different institutions, measuring looks different, but also for different stages of academic development, measurements need to be different. So my feeling is, what Noemi showed, from 10 postdocs, you finally got one person in the university. what really matters, I'm sorry to say this, is, well, top publications and research grants awarded, and money collected from top foundations. It really matters if you want to come from 10 to 1. But if you're already in the system and you are a full professor and many people listen to you, this impact through publications in press or TV broadcasts or whatever publicly reachable is important and might be measured. But I would never suggest going to journals, going to press, or going to television in the case of young scholars or postdocs thinking about academic careers. So this is my way of thinking. Depending on the stage of academic development, different measurements are needed, and also emphasis is put differently on different type of activities.
Okay, thanks. Noemi, did you want to come in? I see you nodding.
Yeah, I think what Marek mentioned is right on. I just wanted to add one small point. So first, I know that there are some systems now that are trying to capture social services a bit more. So for example, there's the Acumen portfolio, which is capturing a lot of different activities that the researcher is doing, but it's still trying to quantify them. There is another initiative that I know of, which is called Research Quality Plus. It's from a funding agency in Canada, and they have a very elaborate way of calculating societal impact, but that's really on developing country, research in developing country. So the one thing that I think is important to remember is that we're still working. I think there's still work happening into that, but also that we have to be careful not to fall in the trap of measuring services by services within the university. So by the number of committees that you're representing and the number of, everything that you do within your own institution and with different academics. This is not, we should really make an active effort to move beyond that when we look at services.
Okay, thank you. And on to the next question. This one has 6 votes. How do you hope to change the academic culture and not only the career paths on paper in Norway? So I guess this is one for you, Anne. How do you hope to change the academic culture?
Well, I think at that point it will be international work that's needed, work that's done in international organizations like EUA and others. I think it is not necessary. It's not good to make national efforts which are not applicable in an international setting. So I think when we have worked in the 2 committees in Norway, we have looked at the international systems and tried to make suggestions that will also apply internationally. But it is, of course, necessary to take time needed for having a fair system. And if there is already systems out there, electronic systems that try to make measures that can be used in this way of evaluating a person in academia, I think it would be nice. But I think also when it comes to qualitative measurements, it's often, it's not as accurate as when you count. So you will always come to a situation where people are not treated fair in their own opinion. So I think we have a lot of work ahead of us to make this system function nationally and internationally, and that has to be the goal.
So changing academic culture. Noemi, do you want to come in on that?
So not from the Norwegian point of view. But so to change the academic culture, I really think that we have, like I mentioned, we have to address all of the levels of assessments, and not just focus on the researcher level, even though we tend to think that the researcher level is where the culture happens. There's also the way that the evaluation work at the institution level. So the way the money that is given to the institution, what they look at, will depend on how the institution treats their researchers, what they expect from them, also what the institution values. So in the first session this morning, we heard a lot about rankings. If the institution still follows rankings and puts them on their website, well, you cannot really expect the researchers to change their culture and say, well, we don't care about quantitative metrics anymore, and we don't want to be competitive. So there's a lot of different levels that need to be addressed to tackle culture. And I think it's difficult. I wouldn't say it's impossible. I'm still young and hopeful, but I really think it's the responsibility of everyone. We need to have a strong dialogue, a strong interaction between actors to be able to address the cultures, because it's all of us.
Okay, Marek, changing academic culture, is it possible?
Yeah, I strongly believe in changing academic culture from the inside, through incentives or through debates or internal changes. And I'm quite negatively imposed to thinking about changing academic culture from the outside, especially through higher education reforms or large-scale systemic Big Bang reforms, etc. We've had this type of efforts in the past 30 years in Poland, and generally Central and Eastern Europe, because we are trying to change institutional culture across the board, everywhere. And we know that this is mostly generational issue. So people behave as they, in science or in academia, as they have been socialized to behave. And it's enormously difficult to change them. Think of teaching them English to write in high impact index journals. It's difficult because they don't know English well enough. Or think about changing them into hard-working top performers if for 20 years they have never been top performers. So it's a generational issue. I would suggest changes to young generation and would focus on those young people to make them think differently rather than try to change everyone in academia, no matter what generation, what age, etc., etc. It's just unthinkable to me. So to come back to the major question, it takes sometimes even decades to have a internal change of academic culture, maybe 20, 30 years, when new generations come and old generations leave. This is a long perspective.
Okay, that's an interesting point.
But just a comment. I mean, open access seemed to be accepted faster than anything else that we have tried to change in academia. So there is hope, but it's hard.
Yes, and you know, I think you're right. There's been a real push towards open access, but still some reservations, particularly among our younger colleagues who are worried about having to choose journals without the same reputation as some of the other non-open access journals. So there's still challenges around that, but you're right, we're making progress as we should, because it's a really important area. Anne, the next question again is directed to you. What kinds of metrics do you have in academia in Norway? And I suppose in particular, the second part of the question, what is the most important for the researchers? Which of the metrics that you have access to do the researchers take most seriously?
Yeah, it is called bibliometrics. That's for sure. So that's what we're going to try to change a little bit. But we are very traditional in the way we measure academic career and how we look at a candidate for a new position or someone who is promoted. But I have to say that the teaching skills are now much more rewarded than it used to be. So this has changed over the years, and it's not possible to have a tenure position if you can't prove that you have gone through teaching education by yourself in how to teach. So this has changed over the years, but we are very traditional today, and I'm trying hard to move on, but I see that there will be a lot of obstacles in order to get the new system working in Norway. unfortunately.
Could I just check on measuring teaching in Norway? Would that involve much peer assessment? Would you expect colleagues to be sitting in and assessing each other's teaching?
Yes, that's part of what we do when a person has got a position in order to help out to make the teaching the best possible. But it has been proposed, and we have made a scheme for assessing teaching abilities. So we are introducing that part, and the committees that are now looking at new candidates, if they do not assess teaching abilities the right way, the report is sent back to the committee. So it's much more important than it used to be.
Okay, that's interesting. And Naomi, in your research that you conducted, is that the impression you've got, that while you still see a great need for more change, do you feel that the direction of travel is pushing towards a better assessment of that side of things?
Yes, I mean, I really don't know if I'll just jump into another point, because when Anna was talking, I was thinking about the metrics and the system that we have in place, and then I was reading the chat at the same time, and the discussion whether it's a tradition or a fashion, which I find very interesting as well. And I think at the moment the metrics or bibliometrics are really, really overused, and I don't know so much about teaching and the ways to assess teaching, because my project was really focused on research. But because of the changes, that like the strong digitization of science, we have so many more ways that we can even create metrics if we want, create new visibilities for different processes that are not captured in the very reductionistic bibliometrics that we're using right now. So just some example that I'm thinking, the credit system, so contributor taxonomy. So instead of authorship, you can know exactly what the authors have done, and more journals are starting to add that to their papers. There's more and more visibility of peer review, which is a process that otherwise is completely invisible. But now with Publons or Kids, you can actually make metrics on the contribution of researchers to their research community. You can even read peer review report with open peer review. There's more and more possibilities to also see if the research was done in a transparent way, in a reproducible way, through open science badges and etc. So I really think we have the material that is necessary to make better metrics, but we're just stuck in this tradition or fashion because it's very difficult to change.
Okay. Next two questions I'm going to sort of merge together, because I think they both touch on a similar topic and a really important topic. And this is about how inclusiveness and diversity could be improved by reshaping recognition schemes, and whether or not the schemes that we currently rely on, in a sense, are biased towards certain groups more than others. Anne, I see you nodding. Did you want to reflect on that? And I'll come to Marika and Naomi next.
Well, it is a question that was addressed in one of the committees or in the reports. As it is in Norway, I think we lose both immigrants that are first generations in academia. They are not visible in higher positions, and also women are not numerous enough in the tenure positions. In our university, which is a classical university, we have 40% women as professors at the moment, more than 40%. But if we look at the different disciplines, it varies a lot. So there are obstacles, even though women, for instance, are most numerous when it comes to students, to PhD candidates and postdocs, a little bit less, they don't reach to the top. So there are aspects of careers that sort of tend to promote white men instead of other of women and immigrants. But said that, 25% of our faculty are not from Norway. So we tend to recruit people from abroad, but people from abroad living in Norway tend not to get top positions in Norwegian universities. Traditionally, we know that women are more numerous in teaching positions compared to research positions, and it shouldn't be like that. I tend to say that we lose talent if we don't have a gender balance, for instance, in every aspect of academia. And when it comes to people immigrated to Norway, they should also take part in our universities. So we have to look very close at what mechanism that make this happen, and how we can be sure that talent, so every kind, is present in academia and stay there until they get tenure positions. So just have to say we have a way to go there too.
Well, in fact, if you have 40% of your professors as women in your institution, you've done a lot better than most other institutions, because certainly my institution and the average across the UK is, as you say, more women students, more women postdocs, but fewer women at professorial level, and much less than 40%. Marek, did you want to comment on diversity and inclusiveness?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that academic science is based on inequality, but on the other hand, inclusiveness and diversity increases productivity, increases the level of citations. If you have mixed sex teams in publishing, those publications are better cited, and those publications are more innovative. So overall diversity increases this purely measurable research dimension of universities. I'm fully supporting, except for quotas. I'm not supporting quotas, but generally everyone has an open career, no matter what ethnicity, and especially gender. I spent a lot of time studying gender in the past 2-3 years, gender in academia, so I know it hurts, and what you have now hurts. In Poland, it's not that bad.
Okay, Noemi, what's your view?
Well, I don't want to get exactly in that topic, because I think Marek and Anna had very thorough and very good answers. I just want to add one element, because when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we always talk about gender and ethnicity, which is extremely important, of course, and not debatable. But I also think that we forget some elements of diversity. For example, people who had different career paths, who had long career breaks, and these people, or even disability, and these people are often not considered as, they're compared to the same sort of profiles, when there should also be a diversity element to allow people who have different career progressions for different reasons to also have access to academia.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, all three of you. I'm very conscious we're now 15 seconds away from the end of our session. I really appreciate all three contributions, and thank you for the questions from colleagues who've turned up. A fascinating session from Noemi, Anne, and Marek. Thank you very much indeed. If you'd like to, please press the leave button and go to the global session, and I look forward to seeing some of you in there. So thank you very much indeed for attending, and thanks to our panelists.